What up, Tolkien Poppers? It is Nick here with a post-Thanksgiving cross episode here of the podcast. And, I was trying to get this episode out before I got back from Thanksgiving, and so maybe everyone could have listened to it on their way home if you were traveling, but alas, my own travels got in the way. And, yeah, but you've got it now. And if you're still out there for an extended Thanksgiving, you'll have this to listen to. Or, as you get prepared for the holidays, if you're decorating, making food, you'll have it here with us. But this episode is one that Tripp Fuller from Homebrewed Christianity and the Process This Substack, to which you should subscribe. And I will have links to all of Tripp's stuff in the show notes. Allowed me to post on my own audio feed. And we usually do stuff together with Tolkien, and we did a live stream with Dr. Craig Boyd on the Process This Substack, and then on Facebook and YouTube for the Homebrewed Christianity channels there. And Craig has done a bunch of stuff with Tolkien, and he's been featured on the podcast before. But Craig gave a lecture, and then we did some question and answers here, but he gave a lecture entitled Tolkien and Trump, the Professor or the Profligate. And, we talk about the issue with weird Trump conservatives trying to claim Tolkien as their own. And as Craig will point out, we don't really have to diss on conservatives or say that Tolkien did, because Tolkien speaks for himself, and he dunked on Winston Churchill all the time and compared him to even Saruman and called the people he hung out with ruffians. So Craig says he would probably view Trump the same way, and he does so by comparing him to Saruman and talking about the issues that Saruman has and comparing it to Tolkien's own issues with people who are power hungry. So enough of my yapping. Sit back, relax, and feel vindicated that Tolkien is not a paragon of weird Trumpian conservatism. Yeah. So see you guys later. Peace.
I thought I'd begin with thinking a little bit about Tolkien views some political thought, and not much has been written on that. And I've written a couple of things on this in terms of political rhetoric and also the way he views domination and his use of the term anarchy. And what many people might not know is that he really did not like Winston Churchill. In fact, he refers to Churchill as a ruffian. Now, this term ruffian is really important, and it shows up 48 times in the chapter of The Scouring of the Shire. And this is the one unforgivable thing I feel about Peter Jackson, is that, I realize there are like 5 different endings, okay, but this is really the culmination of the hobbits and their maturity, how they've grown through the journey, how they've become mature. But you have these ruffians who are in control. And of course, they are the ones who are inflicting Saruman's oppression upon the hobbits. And Tolkien refers to Churchill as a ruffian, and also he calls him, references him as Winston and his gang. And then he says to his son Christopher in one of the letters, "My political opinions lean more and more to anarchy, philosophically understood, meaning abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs." So this idea of control is something you need to keep in the back of your mind as we kind of go through this. In another one of his letters, he says, "The most improper job of any man, even saints who at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing." That term bossing is important as well, because Saruman is referred to as the boss. "Is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it. and least of all those who seek the opportunity. The medievals were only too right in taking nolo episcopari, and that means I do not wish to be the bishop, were as the best reasons a man could give for on two others in making him a bishop. So the qualification to become a bishop was that you didn't want to be a bishop, okay? And this really resonates throughout the entire Lord of the Rings. And then he says this idea, he reemphasizes this idea of the whiskered gentlemen and their desire to control. And he says that it's, he says, I would arrest anyone who uses the word state in any sense other than the inanimate realm of England and its inhabitants, a thing that has neither power, rights, nor mind. And after a chance of recantation, execute them if they remain obstinate. So these are powerful words. So you see this reference to Winston as his gang and the ruffians, and these are those who lust after power. And he comments on the Lord of the Rings and expresses the same sentiments throughout. And he says in another letter, letter 155, he says the supremely bad motive is for this tale, since it is specifically about it, domination of other free wills. The enemy's operations are by no means all goetic deceits, but magic that produces real effects in the physical world. But his magia he uses to bulldoze people and things in his gotea to terrify and subjugate. So that's another thing you need to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we think about Tolkien and Trump. And so what Tolkien is saying is that the lust for power is the greatest evil. It's this desire to control other people and dominate them. Now, we can consider this idea of power in terms of maybe three kinds of, maybe a taxonomy, if you will. There are people who desire power for evil motives, and that's clearly Saruman. Saruman wants power so he can control others, and that's all we see with Saruman, is that he wants to control others, he wants to control Rohan, wants to control everything that he can, the orcs and Fangorn and so on. Now, there's another desire for power. So, and that's the ultimate, that's really the worst of the evils. So it's a desire for power for evil purposes. But there's also the desire for power for good purposes. And this is clearly a case of Boromir and Denethor. So they want power so that they can use it to save their country. But this is really kind of a utilitarian approach that I will use whatever means necessary so that I can accomplish my purposes. But you realize that Gandalf and Galadriel realize that even if you wanted to do it for good purposes, in the acquisition of this power, it would corrupt you. And so you can't do that. And so what you have is that there are those who have no desire for power, or at least they resist power. And these are people like Faramir, and you have people like Gandalf and Galadriel, and also Sam. And Sam is a really interesting character because we get into Sam's mind when he has the ring. You don't get that really anywhere else. And Tolkien writes, already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to overthrow Barad-dûr. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. But the thing is, Sam has a certain kind of character. And Tolkien writes, he knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat to betray him. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, not the hands of others to command. And that's, again, this really important notion of domination. So let's return to this notion of the ruffians. The ruffians, this term ruffian is used 48 times in the chapter, The Scouring of the Shire. And if you're doing a close reading, you're going to realize that, any repeated term is going to be really important. And ruffians is central to this particular chapter. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary says that a ruffian is a bully, or even more specifically, a bouncer at a brothel. Okay, a bouncer at a brothel. That is what a ruffian is. And of course, you know that Tolkien, who had worked on the Oxford English Dictionary, knew the meaning of that term. Now, the thing about ruffians is that they have no friends. They have only allies. The ruffians call the hobbits rat folk, and they punish their enemies, anyone who would stand up to them, in a very derogatory way. And they see their own good at the expense of the most vulnerable, especially the hobbits. They view the hobbits as these simplistic individuals. And of course, they're in for a rude awakening when they have to deal with Merry and Pippin, who have become heroes. They consolidate their power. They are despised by good people, and they terrorize the innocent. So, how would Tolkien view Trump? And this is where it gets interesting, I think. Clearly, ICE are the ruffians. They're bullying and acting with impunity because the boss demands it. They objectify others as aliens or criminals or illegals. And so recall this notion of the rat folk. And what's particularly interesting is that anytime you use language like aliens or criminals or illegals instead of persons, you are prioritizing an objectification of individuals made in the image of God, and you are relegating them to a particular status that is less than human. And of course, ICE terrorizes the innocent, just like the ruffians terrorize the hobbits. There's a contempt for those who disagree. And here, the use of the word fools, I've been working on this recently, is pretty interesting. So the people who refer to Gandalf as a fool are Saruman and Denethor and the Witch King of Angmar. Are these people whom we should trust with their judgment? I would say no. Okay. Now, Gandalf does use the term fool, but it's almost always in reference to Pippin. And it's legitimate because Pippin is a fool, but he does grow. Now, here we find that so those who are threatened, those who are evil, call others fools, except for Gandalf. Notice how anytime someone disagrees with Mr. Trump, he calls them low IQ persons, which is probably more of a statement about himself than it is about AOC or Jasmine Crockett or others who disagree with him. There's also this arrogance in thinking that he and he alone knows the state of things and all should succumb to his will. And that's basically Trump once again. And finally, Trump has what I would call a legion of Grima worm-tongued sycophants that do his bidding. So if you look at his cabinet, there's no way the 25th Amendment could be invoked because these are all individuals who they're basically Grima Wormtongues in the sense of they're going to do whatever he says. So what we find is that people like Trump use coercion. Um, and that is exactly what Saruman and Sauron, of course, you don't get to see much of Sauron as a character acting there. You have to find more about Sauron in the Silmarillion. But the bad people are those who use coercion. But even Gandalf at one point confesses that he had to put the fear of fire into Gollum, and he regrets it. But there's still a consistency to Gandalf's character. So instead of coercion, you find persuasion. Gandalf is the one who convinces Frodo not to be, cruel to Gollum, and he tries to, he convinces Bilbo and says, "Look, I'm not trying to harm you. I'm trying to help you." And so he uses, a sense of persuasion, and that's what I think is particularly interesting here. And Sam is also persuaded in that particular scene by humility. There's a sense in which Sam understands that the persuasion of the good is better than this idea of controlling people. So this takes me, I want to finish up here with this. Something from Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen has this little book, In the Name of Jesus, which is a fascinating little volume. And it's about the three temptations of Christ. And he says these three temptations are to be relevant, turning stones into bread, to be spectacular, throwing himself off the temple, or to be powerful, commanding the entire world. And what Nouwen says is that there's this, the culture tells you to be relevant. And you think about someone like Donald Trump, and you think about his show, The Apprentice. He so desperately wanted to be relevant. And so he had this show. And so he wasn't turning stones into bread. He had to be on the television. He had to have people following him. But he also wanted to be spectacular. So when he runs for president that first time, he comes down this golden escalator, and he is the spectacular person. But probably more and most important is that he desires to be powerful. He covets the kind of power that dictators have, and he wants to be that person. He wants to be a Saruman. But the problem is he's not nearly as smart as Saruman. He really doesn't have any sense of the charisma of Saruman. He doesn't have, in Tolkien's terms, the voice of Saruman. I won't make any comments about his voice, okay? But he does not have that power of persuasion. But he's susceptible to all of these three temptations. And what Nouwen asks at the very end of this one chapter, he says, what makes the temptation of power so seemingly irresistible? Maybe it is that power offers an easy substitute for the hard task of love. It seems easier to be God than to love God, easier to control people than to love people, easier to own life than to love life. So in conclusion, I would say this. You can follow in the footsteps of Gandalf and Sam, or you can follow the crazed corruption of Donald Trump and Saruman. But I don't think that you can follow both. So thank you, and let's open it up to what things people might like to ask.
All right. There we go. What's up, Nick?
Hey, I'm just here basking in the light of,
Donald Trump as Saruman, but like I don't know what kind of he's like below Saruman. Craig, what is that? What happens when you're below Saruman but not quite a Grima?
Um, I don't know. I don't think there's any character in Tolkien that actually gets at that because, Tolkien says there's Saruman the Wise. And when he says Saruman the Wise, he means Solomon or Saruman the Informed. And if there's anyone who's uninformed, it's Donald Trump. Okay. But he has this lust for power. And that's one of the things in one of the letters that Tolkien notes is the various species of individuals have a particular fatal flaw or um, sin that is appropriate to them, and it is the domination with wizards. But it would be an insult to Saruman, really, to say that Trump was like Saruman, and I apologize to Saruman.
Well, look, we gotta give a good horn of Gondor for Kyle. Already having a question in the chat. Ah, there we go. The Horn of Gondor. Tolkien shows that ordinary hobbits eventually rise against the ruffians. Are there lessons we can draw about resistance to the real-life ruffians in our shire?
Yeah, I think there really are, and that's a great question, and it is in terms of what I would call the Catholic social teaching of solidarity. Working with those who are on the ground level and who come together as like-minded individuals and resist. And that's basically what Merry and Pippin do. Frodo is kind of like this, he's standing back and he's saying, I'm not going to use violence, because he's been thoroughly converted to Gandalf's approach. Okay. And Sam is not a natural fighter, except for that, there's that one instance in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, where he basically, takes names and, just knocks people, orcs out. But I think that Merry and Pippin, though, have come to that point where they're going to speak up and they're going to speak out. So there have to be people in every culture who are brave enough to speak up and to speak out. And when they do that, what that provides then is a sense of safety for others who are like-minded. And there's a solidarity of people coming together. And I really think that that's how many of us should think about resistance.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I think about is how the if you think of the hobbits without having gone on the whole journey, you aren't going to get the spark that lights the resistance kind of thing at the end. Like it's coming back there that then Gandalf leads them to go reclaim their home, and it's just the four hobbits showing back up, and Saruman and company are all there, and then they're like, oh, we got to get Farmer Maggot in on this, and Sam's like slightly distracted because he's trying to spit game at the ladies, and the people are like, oh, Merry and Pippin, they're taller, they got armor, right? But like they show they're absent where this giant change takes place in the Shire, and then they come back different people, but it's still those people in that land and stuff that they love, and they see this giant difference. And I've been rereading it, and one of the things I noticed this year is how the growth of each of those characters becomes transparent when they return and show back up. And they have this experience of being like, this is our home, but it's not. And it reminded me of living in Scotland 3 years and then showing back up here and I moved home where I really hadn't been for 15 years, and in the South. And I'm like, oh, what happened while I was gone? But okay, Leah on Substack has a question, and Substack isn't connected, so I had to cut and paste it. So if it's slightly confusing, I was cutting and pasting her question on Substack, but I'll read the whole thing. She said, I would love to hear a little more about the ruffians in terms of the scouring of the Shire. While they might have been men and therefore outsiders, there were a lot of hobbits who were collaborating with them and with Saruman to obtain clout and power. What kind of lessons can we learn about in terms of working with folks who might not be ruffians, but are certainly complicit in collaborating?
That's a really interesting question. I think there is, first of all, a person needs to be able to trust those who do not desire power, but who desire justice. And I think that one of the things that motivates Merry and Pippin and others is that anger is a very important thing, because anger is a prerequisite, I think, for justice. Because when you see something that's unjust, it should make you angry. It doesn't necessarily mean you should be wrathful. And that's why Frodo says, don't kill them, don't kill Saruman, but there's a sense of anger at the injustice, and that is central to anyone who has a conscience, I think. So when you are thinking in terms of working with those who might be ruffians, I don't think let me just back up. I would say there are those who are complicit, and those people are not people you should trust, because they are interested in the private good, not the common good. And I think Tim is referencing this, or is alluding to this in one of his comments. In the Shire, there's a sense of the common good, at least when the hobbits left. It's clearly a status-oriented caste system, okay? But it still is something that is, there's a kind of harmony, there's a peacefulness, and there isn't that sense in which, we have to be so suspicious of others. And so I think an individual has to have a well-formed conscience. And of course, there are hobbits that don't. Let's talk about, we could talk about the Sackville Bagginses, who just simply, want access, I think. But how you think about that in terms of collaborating, I don't think that a person of good conscience can collaborate, but there has to be that finding of the solidarity with others in the community. And if you cannot find that, well, you're going to be crushed. But what Merry and Pippin do is that they rally people in a sense of having that solidarity. I don't know if that's really kind of an answer, but it's kind of the best that I can do at this point.
Well,
I think about.
This is a follow up to that. Then you asked the question. Like, one of the things, the past couple of years while I was working on the big Bonhoeffer audio documentary series, I spent a lot of time reading the text of the Confessing Church, but also the German Christian Church, and did a number of interviews with scholars that are looking at just how it is. This overwhelming majority of Germany became bystanders to what's going on, and in their decision to decide that certain what was going on around them was something they don't have to have a thought about, and the decision to not be seized by the violence to their neighbors, to explain it away, or this kind of thing, not being completely repulsed, but also not like going like, oh, this is good. But there was this whole group of people who, when the shifting of the power came, found it best just to ride the current. And then there were certain perks that came to people that did, but you didn't have to be like a hardcore supporter, right? And then the laws change and all stuff gets clear. But Vicky Barnett, in her book on bystanders, that's kind of like telling the story after World War I into Hitler kind of taking full power and eventually reinstating the army. It is sitting there trying to describe how the moment you make once the majority of people made accommodations to the first few, which the thumbs up's not to accommodating with fascism. With the first few times, once you start on that trajectory, it just becomes spacious, and more things get filled in, and it takes like someone or a group of people planting their foot, or like sheer the violence of war and stuff to come in. And when I think about this particular story, like someone in the chat, Rude Thoughts with TRL on Substack was like, well, who's Farmer Maggot in the scenario? Or Ted Sandyman? Like there are these characters, but you see, or even the Saxville Bagginses, right? Like are playing the game and stuff until they don't. There is this sense that you see in the Shire where at some point, those who decided to plant their foot, initially the hobbits returning, kind of shook to awaken individuals that had been compliant or complicit or silenced and sidelined. And that someone said no became an invitation for others to kind of open their eyes to all they've accommodated to and what was going around. And so I hadn't really thought about the connection between the two till you were talking. But it's fascinating to see how, we're sitting there while you're reading Lord of the Rings. You don't find out till the end all the things that have happened when they're gone, from their home. And so many of the people they loved and were on that journey thinking about, did very little, and accommodated to it. And it was like the return of them that kind of initiated the viability of something else.
I would, I agree with all of that. And if I reach back into my work on virtue ethics and the vices, I would say that there's a certain amount of moral inertia that we have to overcome. And courage is maybe the most important thing in that respect, because it takes courage to overcome the inertia of just simply being apathetic or conciliar, in that sense. And so it requires, and I think every virtue requires kind of a overcoming of your own inertia in terms of doing what's right. And I think that's what you see in terms of the entire trajectory of the four hobbits over the course of the narrative. And not only that, I would think that it's this ability to say, I'm not Lutheran, but it's like, here I stand, I can do no other kind of mentality. And once someone does that, it can kind of attract others in ways, but that takes courage because you're going to take heat for it. You're going to get it, and people will come after you. So there's that.
I wonder too, because we're on here, if sticking with bringing it in the metaphor into our own world. Like the four hobbits had the backing of pretty powerful people. Obviously, like Gondorians and men can't really go into the Shire because of the new laws, but they are people who have gone through the fire and they have the weapons and the power and they've got the backing. And so I wonder if a lot of the complicity or the fear to act is because we don't have a lot of examples, right? You've got people like Sam and Frodo and Merry and Pippin who are like, they're in armor and weapons, and they Merry literally killed the Witch King, right, alongside Éowyn. And so to not have people with examples, and then, I think it's also the way that they apply it too. Or what they do with the complicit and bystanders and maybe even some of the participants. They liberate them, right, those who have been captured and deceived in the Shire, but then they also give them a chance to like repent and then help rebuild the Shire. And I don't remember if there's any that actually resist that. I mean, the ruffians that die in the Battle of Bywater, obviously, but yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts about who are the examples in our world right now.
Yeah. Well, you've got, Tolkien talks about, he actually uses the term exemplars. And, of course, there are exemplars there. And he also says that there are these species-specific vices. And he says among hobbits, it's sloth and stupidity. Which, of course, I'm thinking Pippin right away. Okay. But the idea here is that, again, that's overcoming the inertia of the sloth, overcoming the inertia of the stupidity. It's that kind of, do you have exemplars? Frodo and Sam are, once you get to, the problem of, the breaking of the fellowship, they're on their own. They get a little bit of help from Faramir, but do they get much else? I mean, it's that there's still some fellowship there among the small group, and I think that's critical. And I think people often overlook that because there's the fellowship is broken up into smaller fellowships. And if you don't have those fellowships, you end up in despair like Denethor.
One of the new edition of the letters, Craig, there is like one of the newer letters or one of the extensions of letter 91, I think, 91C. Tolkien actually like does a further, like a harder comparison of Churchill to Saruman. So like
really?
He actually, yeah.
I've not
so
read
he
that
like,
yet.
yeah. So there's a part where I know nothing about the history, but apparently the Germans are withdrawing from Greece in 44 to, and British government is funding the current Greek government. And Tolkien basically talks about how Churchill's, call for democracy, is a sort of a vehicle for colonialism and empire building, and says, I feel like in my own world that Saruman has taken over and basically we live on a scorched earth. So it goes even further, than even just calling him a ruffian at one point. But to say that, bringing this back to Trump, because he's not as clever as Sauron or Saruman, clearly. But I think about even even Morgoth, right? Because Morgoth wants to destroy, and he's not particularly clever. He's just powerful, right? And he's got more of a diminutive.
You should say something about who Morgoth is if people have only read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Okay, deal. So for those of you who have not delved deep in the Silmarillion, you should. It's fantastic. It'll just deepen that Tolkien experience for you. But long time ago in a universe, galaxy far, far away, the Morgoth is basically the Satan of Middle Earth. Okay, he's the original big bad. There's a group of gods that the one god Iluvatar creates in the
demigods.
Demigods, thank you.
That's
yeah,
Tolkien's
not capital
term.
G gods, lower G demigods type of things. And so Morgoth is the one bad one. And so he destroys the earth. He creates the first orcs, trolls type of things, dragons. And his whole goal is to destroy everything good that is created by those who are on the good side or align themselves with the will of Iluvatar, aka the monotheistic god of Middle Earth. And he basically, there's a couple battles he shows up in, and he kind of kicks some ass. But ultimately, after he gets his leg cut off, he goes down into a cavern, right? Basically, and then uses his powers to manipulate people to do all of the heavy lifting for him, and never comes back out until he's forced out. So I don't know. That feels more like Trump, where he's really more interested in destroying things or letting people destroy things as long as he can have his gold-plated whatever, And he's also powerful because he has that cult of personality.
Well, the additional bits on there, letter 91, Nick, that's just probably, he was worried, about the British Empire, that they use money to prop up people in other countries under the guise of spreading democracy, freedom, and markets. Luckily, America doesn't do that. We will prop up.
Yeah, we dodged that bullet for sure.
We've gone so far as to inviting former leaders of Al Qaeda to the White House and making sure they're president of Syria. So, look, this is we've got a whole new game. If only Saruman had Bitcoin, then okay. So here's one of the questions I got sent in when we posted we were doing this, and I think given some of the quotes and stuff that you've already shared about Tolkien's desire to resist control, complaints about humanity being undermined by the lust of power and the desire to dominate others' free will, and his anarchist streak. All of which, hope our vice president was paying attention.
He's too busy looking at Erica Kirk.
No, don't say that. His wife might put him on the couch tonight. If you were a Tolkien fan, Craig, and let's say that you wanted to collect, I don't know, hypothetically, large volumes of data on citizens, maybe like of all over the world, without even requesting permission, and then create giant psychographs algorithmically to anticipate people that could be problems, and then sell it to militaries across the globe. If you were to think of a name from the Tolkien universe to give this rampant techno futurist desire for control, power, and domination a name, would it be Palantir?
That's what I was anticipating. But it's, the problem with the Palantir is that it gives the illusion of omniscience. It's not genuine omniscience. And so I did an essay with my daughter a little while ago on Foucault's, Tolkien's Panopticon and Foucault's Two Towers. And it's this idea that the person in the Panopticon who is observing all of the prisoners is such that they think they have omniscience, but they don't. And it's an illusion. And this illusion is such that it's kind of their fatal flaw in the sense that, we think we know everything, but there are things going on outside of this. Now, maybe Peter Thiel, thinks he can access this, but maybe he doesn't understand the resistance that people have to this. Because if you think about various kinds of revolutions and the attitudes that people have now towards the current presidential, administration, it's, I think, the lowest in history in terms of approval rating. And so are people going to rise up? And I think that might be one of the points of, protests, is that you come together, and I've been to many of them, and you show up and it's like you see someone, it's like, oh, you too. Yeah, me. Yes, I didn't know that you were, part of that. And so you start building this resistance to the technocracy that is dominating our lives. And so is there actually a way to resist it? Well, I don't know if it'll be successful or not, but I'm here to try. So for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Kind of keeping on track with, not only this idea of meeting people in resistance and how do we gather people to do that, but then also referencing some of your more recent work that you did in an essay in Tolkien Among the Theologians, where you talk about rhetoric, about how do we persuade people to do virtuous things, and how is that different than like Saruman using it to persuade people to do things that are the opposite of virtuous, right? To do that. So, like I said, what's the difference between, seeing somebody at the protest and being like, hey, let's get together, let's convince people to join us. And how is that different than, Saruman trying to manipulate the Rohirrim when they get to Isengard, right? And try to manipulate Theoden,
Yeah. I think there has to be some kind of, and this gets you into moral psychology, and the idea is there something that's truly good, and the thing I find is very common among my friends who are agnostic and atheists and theists is that it's wrong to do a number of different kinds of things, like torture children, to abuse young girls, to incarcerate people who are innocent. You don't have to be a theist to understand that. I think there are basic intuitions that most of us share, and I don't care whether, like I said, I don't care what your religious views are, because the content is the same, but you might have different reasons for why you think it's wrong. But I do think that something like that is really important in terms of saying, yes, there is something that's good, and there are things that are evil, and what Mr. Trump is doing is evil. And like I said, if you don't have to be a theist to know that. And so the people who are still supporting this, I think, are people who have a kind of, and I apologize for the kind of ableist language here, but I think they're morally blind. They simply cannot see what is in front of them. And there are those who can see it, and of course I've had these conversations with my wife recently. But what if they're right? And I said, and my view is, there's no way these people can be right if they're supporting torture and these kinds of things. You just cannot do that. And if you do think that's okay, then all hell breaks loose. Nothing's immoral anymore except for power.
Mm-hmm. So, I have a question about this, and since you're a professional ethicist, you can explain this. But in your typology earlier about the kind of the different desires for power, one is like the power for an evil motive, right? And Saruman was the example. But then there's the power for good purposes, like Boromir or Denethor, right? Where there's this sense that the urgent demands of the present, the challenges we're facing, make you sit when you're hanging out with Elrond and company, and you're like, but it's a gift. What if, we could use this power and we could really stick it to Mordor? And this kind of thing. And one of the things under that the kind of this desire for power for good purposes is a sense of self where one not only thinks they deserve like power that even us open relational types don't render to God, but you have knowledge to know what the good is, in a sense, not just for yourself, not just for how you engage and connect to the larger web of life that you're a part of, but you actually know what the good is in a way that can justify your blindness to the actual experience, desires, and voices of other people, right? And so like this power for good purposes gap between those that have like desire this power for good purposes. That's where this sense of the demands of the urgent go, oh, this makes sense, as opposed to those where there's a powerful evil motive. And in one of the differences between Denethor and Boromir is the redemption of Boromir. And this is one of the places the movie really helps the book.
Right.
Is in the redemption of Boromir and the parting scene between him, Aragorn, and dying and an attempt to protect the Sam and Pippin, or Merry and Pippin, and so like I wonder, as an ethicist, who like what is it like once you start to delineate the different reasons people desire power, how you both are clear about a denunciation of evil, but you don't want to close the door on the redemption of Boromir by acting as if everyone you're facing is Saruman. Or as Elgin, when he was little, said, Elgin.
All right. I think I'm there. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Elgin, when he was little,
So,
said, you don't need to turn a Jar Jar Binks into Darth Vader. Even though he's the one that makes the motion, for Palpatine to come in. So, like, as an ethicist, how do we have, like, think through, like, having clarity about, right, like, nope, Sauron doesn't need the ring, Saruman's evil. Then they're, like, the manipulated, turned inward, perverted types like Wormtongue. Then you get, but then there's, like, Boromir had the chance for redemption.
Right. I would say two things here. First of all, it's kind of a background. One of the things that Aquinas says is that there are three really important elements to any kind of moral action. One is the end intended as the cause of goodness. And of course, Denethor and Boromir both intend the good. And the good is the salvation of their people. Now, it gets more complicated.
Which was their vocation.
Yes,
right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They're the stewards of Gondor in the absence, because Aragorn hadn't returned yet. This is their job. This is their vocation.
Right. Exactly. And so you can't blame them for that. But there are these two other aspects with Aquinas. One is what he calls the object of the act, and that is what is the action itself that you're doing. And of course Boromir tries to take the ring by force, and anytime anyone takes the ring by force, Gandalf notes that that's a really bad thing. So it's kind of doing violence. But there's also what Aquinas calls the accidental qualities, the how, the where, and the when kind of aspects. And so and you have to have all three of these, the end intended, the accidental qualities, and the object of the act for an act to be good. These are all necessary conditions, speaking philosophically. So you have to have all three. And if you don't have all three, then it's going to be problematic. And so with Boromir and with Denethor both, and I'll get into the distinction a little bit later between the two of them, they both have the end intended as a good thing. But as I've kind of noted over my 40 years of teaching ethics, I often ask, what happens to people when they desire power? They're going to set things right, and both Gandalf and Galadriel say this. I would start out doing this, for good reasons. But then what happens to me in that process? So there's a kind of corrosive influence on that desire for power. And this is one of the brilliant insights that Tolkien has in terms of moral psychology. What does this do to your soul when you're desiring this? Because, it can become utilitarian, or it can become even egoistic, like Saruman. So the difference then, what I go to with Boromir and Denethor, is that I think that it's, for Denethor, it's this idea that he gives up all hope because he's consumed by pride. And so it is his superbia. It's this sense of, I know things no one else knows, and everyone else is a fool. And because I know these things, I realize that all I can do is despair. And so he tells Pippin, go in and die in whatever manner seems fit to you. You know, and it's like, do you really know this? And no, he doesn't. There's a kind of arrogance there. But so can Boromir be redeemed? Yes, because he realizes that what he had done was this desire, this illicit desire to take the ring. And Denethor never really comes to grips with that. He never really comes to grips with the fact that he desires the ring, and in such a way that he would use it, and anyone who disagrees with him is stupid. And so there's a kind of incorrigibility to his pride. And that's why I think they're different, is that Boromir, at the end of his life, possesses a sense of humility, and Denethor does not. And humility is probably the first step on the road to recovery. So maybe there are 13 steps to, and not 12. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
The here we got another. This is another question from Substack, and I think it's interesting in the sense of asking about Aragorn as this like image of the ideal king plays out differently in the movies and the book. And so, rude thoughts with TRL on Substack said, I recently read a social media post which was differentiating written Aragorn versus movie. It said in the book, he accepted his kingship from the beginning, while in the movie, he reluctantly accepts the mantle. Do you find this accurate? Which should we seek more to emulate? What's going on with the different relationships of Aragorn to power?
That raises a lot of questions. One of the first things is a essay by David Rozema titled "The Core of the Original," and he really goes after Peter Jackson on kind of abusing Aragorn and Faramir as not being faithful to the text. And then second thing is, to what extent is a movie adaptation, should it be considered on its own as opposed to the text itself? Well, I'm kind of a textualist, so I'm irritated by a lot of things that Peter Jackson does and doesn't do. So, my cards are on the table. I think Aragorn in the book, you find that his name in Elvish is Estel, which means hope. And so I don't see him as faltering in terms of hope, or when he engages, Sauron with the Palantir, or his reluctance to be the king. Elrond has to convince him. I don't see any of that consistent with Tolkien's own views. I just don't. I think that's not helpful. So I don't think Aragorn reluctantly accepts it. I think he sees it as a vocation, as a calling. This is what he is called to do, and he's going to do whatever he has to do, and that's why he takes the paths of the dead, because that is his calling. And I think that that's a really important distinction, because I don't think Aragorn has the kind of character that wavers. It's a fairly solid character. And that's the same with Faramir. Faramir in the book says, if I saw that thing in the middle of the road, I would not pick it up. I would, but, it's the Faramir character in the movie is, I'm going to try to appease daddy, with bringing him the ring. That's, I think that's a violation of the characters themselves. And that's something that, really irritates me. And by the way, get off my lawn.
Well, look, I'll just say, at least the movie didn't ruin Bombadil.
Well, yeah. That's true. That's true.
Tripp did insult me on Discord and say that one of my behaviors was very movie Faragor, or Faramir, thank you. Faragor was very movie Faramir behavior, so.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what it was, but I do remember.
It's because you haven't. It's because you haven't come to the truth that PBR is delicious.
Oh God, yeah, Pabst Blue Ribbon, like that. That's someone that's like that is trying to explain how movie Faramir is so good, and they're like, "Look, Pabst Blue Ribbons won blue ribbons. Like, what has the book ever done?" And you're like, "I don't know, the most selling book of the 20th century."
You
after
can't
the
tell me that
Bible?
Butterbur is not just pulling some freaking drafts of PBR. You can't tell me that. Well, it's not.
I can
Are
because they
we a little
enjoy
off
drinking it.
Are we a little off topic here?
Yeah, sorry.
Just a
Apologies.
little.
Apologies.
Just a little.
Craig, you're well. See, if you weren't here, there'd be 30 minutes of that. But we did get a Faramir question, and so since it's already been brought up, we can somehow squeeze this into the topic, Craig.
Okay.
All right. So, and this is someone who has read the books after Nick and I talked about the movies doing Faramir nasty. And the fact that they said it that way made me think, I guess we did do them, because that's the phrase I always use. I was like, the movie did Faramir nasty. And they said, if you're going to talk about Trump and Tolkien, I think so much of Trump's problem is he does not have it within his cognitive ability to think about life from perspective of his opponent, let alone recognize their dignity. True. When you said that the movie did Faramir nasty, I had no idea how much that one bit they get right in the film would land once you see the fullness of his character. Can y'all just talk about that bit where Faramir says, and then he puts the quote, "This enemy," this is when he's looking at the dead soldier, right, that they had just killed.
Yeah.
That bit. "This enemy, his sense of duty is no less than yours, I deem. You wonder what his name is, where he came from, and if he really was evil at heart. What lies or threats led him on this long march from home? If he would not rather have stayed there in peace, war will make corpses of us all." And the follow-up after this, "Do you like Faramir so much because he's an anarchist?" And I didn't know the whole Tolkien anarchist bit till your opening there, Craig. And so Jeremy wants to know about Faramir voicing Tolkien's anarchist thoughts, that the only reason you end up with a whole bunch of people at war is because someone lied or threatened to them. Otherwise, you're not getting a bunch of poor working class people to show up in trenches.
Yeah. I kind of see Faramir as hobbits, a hobbit who was a human, because he wants to live in peace. One of the most famous lines is, "He does not love the arrow for its swiftness, but for what it protects." That's one of the most important lines, I think, that Faramir says, and it's this idea that of course there are values that are greater than valor, and I think that's a key difference between Faramir and Boromir. Boromir wants valor, and if you want to go Platonic on this, Boromir is the timocratic person who desires honor above all things. And I think Faramir is the person who desires peace and justice above all things. And that's why I think Faramir is the that person that and actually, Tolkien even, references Faramir as kind of his own sense of who he is. And of course, you think about Tolkien's experience in the war. He's not fighting for valor. He's there because he has to defend England. That's what he's there for. So in terms of thinking about that, is this kind of an anarchist approach? I think it's more of a anarchy, only in the sense of there's no central government. There's, so it's not a republic. It's not it's not a communism. It's not anything at all like that. It's just simply a group of individuals who live in peace with one another, and they recognize a common good. And that's the beauty of what Sam does when he comes back to the Shire, and takes all of those grains from Lothlorien and does the thing, in terms of growing trees. That's part of the common good. And it doesn't, anarchy does not mean that, chaos reigns. It means that people have a shared sense of meaning and of the good.
It reminds me too of characters who, like you said, weren't chaotic or embraced chaos, but broke the rules to do the better of the two options, right? To do the good, right? I think it's Hama at the
Yes.
gates of or at the Meduseld, right? Who lets the company in, right? And that's was illegal under the Theoden's law with Grima, and then of course with Baragon, right? Letting Pippin and Gandalf come into the tombs to save Faramir. But then even too, I think about this isn't even breaking the rules, but going through maybe. Oh, I mean, Faramir let Sam and Frodo go, which was breaking the law there, and then
all three are examples of the good being a bit oblivious as to morals.
Yeah. And even Faramir's marriage, like there's a history in Gondor where back a long time ago, Gondorians married Rohirrim, right? But then all of a sudden it was like dirty too at one point.
Yeah.
And there was wars and things. But then Faramir kind of breaks with the societal norms and kind of bridges back Rohan and Gondor through the marriage of Eowyn too.
Hey, can you give me a minute, about 2 minutes timeout for a break?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
So we got a question, and I know, and I'm pretty sure you have an answer for this.
Oh, I'm excited.
All right. So Andrea wrote in. She said, "I really loved the conversation with Tom Hillman about his book Pity, Power, and Tolkien's Ring that we did at some point when we were doing Tolkien related stuff."
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about, it was a long email, but she was asking about how, like one of the features that in Donald Trump or the MAGA ethos that's so problematic, like, and people are even like mad at Marjorie Taylor Greene for being like, I might have been a little aggressive with some of the stuff I said in the past. And you're like, no, junk, Jewish space lasers. Or anyway, and like her getting trolled about just like being like, I'm not changing my convictions. I just think I might have done it wrong. Right. Like what, when you think about that contrast, which we mentioned in the summary of like Saruman and Gandalf, she asked what role the cultivation of pity plays in the ability to desire something other than control. And she gave a number of examples in Tom's book, but then knowing we talked to him, then she read it and gave very detailed things. The question is really about like what does that ability for your subjectivity to be seized in pity how does that make available a moral reasoning you don't have when your subjectivity is always kind of like guarded, protected, and such?
Yeah. It reminds me of just like into our real world with the whole MAGA ethos is like the demonization of empathy, right? This quote unquote sin of empathy, because once you have empathy, you start developing relationships and you start becoming vulnerable, and this idea of control starts going away, right? I think the example of Marjorie Taylor Greene is showing a little bit of empathy, right? Even though she's still insane, there's like lines that she's drawing, and the MAGA ethos is like, you're drawing empathy for people who were assaulted in the Epstein files. And she's like, yes. And people are like, you're a rhino. And and connecting that to Tom and his kind of exploration of pity is that what Tom does is that people have explored pity in Tolkien before, but Tom really does a lot of work to really parse out how central it is, or it's one of the central themes in the Lord of the Rings and possibly just throughout the Legendarium. And pity itself, if you go back to The Hobbit, when Tolkien was kind of working in The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings as he was writing The Lord of the Rings as a sequel, is that when Bilbo does not kill Gollum, right? He has the chance to kill Gollum when he has the ring and he's invisible. And the ring is a corrupting power. And Craig kind of brought it up to where Sam, right? He wants to do something good by conquering Mordor, right, for the good. Bilbo, not so. I mean, in this sense, into The Hobbit, he wouldn't be killing Gollum for the greater good, quote unquote. He'd probably just be doing it because Gollum's gross and evil monster thing. But ultimately, Bilbo's pity is what helps him not be corrupted by the ring. It helps him pass it down to Frodo, and these different moments of pity, which I think are even tied to the examples that we talked about of people breaking the law too. Of Hama is experience is embodying pity, Faramir is, Baragon is, and pity in this sense too. For those who aren't familiar with that term, and Craig, you can come in here and kind of give some stuff here. Is that like pity is more of a sense of is empathy, compassion. Right. This is the idea of pity, where you're feeling what people are doing and you want to act in a good way on their behalf. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Tell me if I get that right, Craig.
No, I think that's right. I would say that empathy is a necessary condition for compassion. And if you do not have empathy, then you cannot have compassion, which is a virtue, you know. So I think that's a key problem for people who want to say, well, empathy is a sin. I don't think they really understand anything about moral psychology. But I think also that something else you said about, Bilbo and, this idea of pity, I think that's really important because it's that ability, I would call it ecstatic, in the sense of standing outside of oneself and seeing things from a different perspective. And so Frodo, he's able to stand outside of himself and understand Gollum. And I don't think Sam really has that capacity because he has other virtues that are dominating him. So he does not have that capacity. I mean, he can have compassion for his friends, but not for his enemies. And that's why Frodo is a really interesting character in the sense that he has compassion for his enemy.
So, you mentioned earlier, Craig, you were talking about Gandalf and the power of persuasion, as ultimately a kind of power that can bring in a world where you don't live in fear for what has come into being, right? Like always kind of like seeking more and more control till it slips through your fingers and this kind of thing. One of the things that if you think of that persuasion power and then you think of that he's the one that puts pity on the agenda for Frodo, right? Like Bilbo has this experience, but it's not till Gandalf lets him in on more of Bilbo's story, where Gandalf says, it was pity that stayed his hand, and pity and mercy, not to strike without need. That kind of that element's there, and so there's this other element of Gandalf of I don't know. The language I've been thinking about is found solidarity. Like if we think of Gandalf's mission, the eternal mission of the wizards, if they're doing their job right, is this kind of empowering, stewarding of creation and all the sentient life, and such that they kind of learn to attune themselves to the melodies of the divine. Like we think back to the kind of the creation story and such. And it seems to me like that Gandalf, if you look at The Hobbit, if you look at the Fellowship, in the Lord of the Rings, and then if you when he shows back up as the White in Lord of the Rings, all of these moments as he shows up to kind of bind people for a kind of found solidarity, where the narratives they were handed, right, like in the Fellowship, elves, dwarves, all the different humans and the hobbits and stuff, he shows back up, and there's a kind of found solidarity that shows back up to Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, and like, what are we going to do? We didn't find the hobbits. Or we show back up in the Ints and these two humans or the two hobbits. Or he shows back up when he gets to the White Tower. Like, there are all these places he shows up. And really what he ends up doing is helping people find solidarity that the narratives they were handed weren't big enough to include all the relationships that matter. And the moment you have this like wider view of solidarity, that is really like literally the gift of the gods, the one that shows up with a freaking ring that's to like bind their hearts with power and commitment in the face of things. Like, he shows up and goes, boom, shakalaka. Like, y'all have a solidarity together that your imagination's the problem. It's not who you are, and it's not the situation. You imagine a world where the narratives you were handed are the only ones you can play out to like find a future. And like this year, I'm in the middle of rereading Lord of the Rings currently, and like he's like the greatest mentor or like kind of like pastoral theologian. And his power, if you just step back into the end of the book, he's like the most effective leader that's there, and no one would have called him the leader. Like, he regularly is put down when he shows up in front of powerful people until they've become his friends. Like, there's all these things about him, and yet there's this like part of his drive is like re-inscribing who you are into the world in a place where the people that are with you in that moment share your narrative. And I don't know. That's what's kind of like continually shown up for me in it. And I wonder if like part of what the hobbits learned when they showed back up in the Shire is the gift of learning to tell a bigger story, where the binaries that you were stuck in, whether it's like the Saxville Bagginses or this or that and kind of things, like you're able to tell a story where there's a found solidarity in the moment, because the world is one we're all going to be in. And flourishing is telling our story and living our lives together. That has like consistently struck me in this reading of read through Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and especially when he helps Theoden. And I think the book is, again, much better than the movie. It's not like he has to be exorcised. He's not some kind of Jesuit who's doing the exorcist here. But also when he goes and gets Éomer, he's not really, is he doing any magic? He's not, the few times you see him doing magic are few and far between, or when he's consulting, when, it's that before they go to the Black Gate, this is what, it's just a consultation, but he's this person who acts by persuasion. He offers things, and maybe that's what wisdom is. And that's why, of course, the word wizard comes from the word wise. He's wise in ways that, Saruman is misnamed as a wizard because he's not wise, because, there's not that sense of moral approach. And so, again, Saruman seeks control. Gandalf seeks to encourage and to engage people to be who they should be, and so I think you're right on target there with that.
My youngest, Haven, we're watching the trilogy. We read The Hobbit, then watched the Hobbit movies, which, whatever. Great if you're 7 and like battles.
Yeah.
But he wanted to read the Lord of the Rings. I'm like, you should watch the movies first, because at least then you have the big story in your head, because I can't give you a summary if you want to read it like at 8. And so we're watching it in 30-minute increments, and we're in the Two Towers currently, and it gets to the bit where Aragorn's talking to now Gandalf the White, and Gandalf's going, look, Sauron has no idea that Frodo is going to take the ring to Mordor, right? And that he's going on his own to Mordor, and Aragorn goes, he's not alone. Sam's with him. And it's one of those like moments in a film that just like totally nail it, because it goes close up on Ian McKellen's face, which is like, he's so good at that. Like, there are very few movies where I love the book first that all of my versions of them in my head get replaced by the actors, but the casting of that film is spectacular. Even Faramir, like he's in my head now, even if his character in the book's better. But it closes up, and you can just see this smirk come up on his face. Yeah. It's like
did he?
Yeah, did he? And the Haven, never seen this before. He's like, he's on his own, and Haven goes, no, he's not. Sam went with him. And then, and he tells him, and he smiles, and I just start crying, which I have an inappropriate relationship with 1 Corinthians, the Gospel of Matthew, and Lord of the Rings. It doesn't take much to get me going. But when Haven, on his first time through, no, he didn't. Sam's with him. And I was like, hit pause. And, not that Haven has any clue about any of this. I was like, that's right, Haven. Sam went with him. And in your life, there'll be times you get the opportunity to be a Sam to somebody. And you're going to jump in a river, even if you don't know how to swim. And there'll be other times where you feel overwhelmed and burdened and such, and someone's going to decide to be your friend. You're going to want to resist it because you feel like the need of neoliberal economic exploitation to be autonomous, control your situation. And I start going on this whole thing. I was like, and then I just want you to know, Frodo, even though he's being corrupted by the ring, knew it would be better if Sam was there. Life is better with friends. You should be a Sam, and you should find one. And you know why? It's a freaking like incarnate angel Gandalf knew the whole thing was different if Sam was with him. And Haven's like, can we start watching the movie again? I'm like, all right. But it was one of those moments.
Great.
Okay, but here's we only have one more question sent in on email, and then Nick, you can ask whatever you want. And it was like, well, can you check? It was about a particular passage in the book, which is in the stairs chapter in Two Towers, which is one of my favorite chapters, and it's literally the page after, all the stories, Gandalf, or when Sam and Frodo were talking about the stories and being in song and all that kind of stuff, which is, again, I'll tear up the chapter in advance, knowing it's coming. But Marty, who I don't know if he's a one-man party, but that would be the nickname I gave him if we were friends. Marty, the one-man party, points out it's right after that conversation where Sam says, now, Mr. Frodo, you shouldn't make fun. I was serious. So was I, Frodo, and so am I. We're going on a bit too fast, you and I. Sam are still stuck in the worst places of the story, and it's all too likely. And he's trying to, like, go back to where they were. And then you get this. Maybe, said Sam, but I wouldn't be the one to say that. Things done and over and made into part of great tales are different. Why, even Gollum might be good in a tale. Better than he is to have by you, anyway. And he used to like tales himself once, by his own account. I wonder if he thinks he's the hero or the villain. And Marty, the one-man party, said, is this Sam having a brief moment where he thinks the redemption of Gollum might be possible? And he goes, I know you're talking about Trump. Do you think you could even say that about him? And one, I'm already taken over by what happened the 3 pages before that. I've never paid attention to this line. But the idea that he's like, Gollum even liked stories once. And I wonder if he thinks, he's a goodie or a baddie. That's another moment to add to Sam's moral imagination. It might be simple, but it's deeper than mine.
Yeah, that's you have to go back to the chapter on the very beginning in the Fellowship of the Rings, and where Gandalf is telling, narrating the story of Gollum and saying there's still hope for Gollum. And so it makes you wonder, is, of course, Tolkien says, in the letters that once Sam, does what he does to Gollum, that seals the fate, but you wonder to what extent, was the future open, if I can use that term. And you also think about, so when you apply this politically, it's been interesting to see that Trump has been talking about redemption, and just this last week, he thinks if anyone can get him into heaven, it's Eric Metaxas. I don't think I'd hitch my wagon to that star. I wouldn't go there, but it makes you wonder about his own sense of mortality, and is there I think about Pippin asking Gandalf, is there any hope? Is there any hope for Donald Trump? And Gandalf responds with, only a fool's hope, or so I'm told. So, but I think there has to be a sense of, so you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, and who knows what's going on with her. I have no idea. It's, but I'm just, I'm through making predictions about anything these days when it comes to politics, because I've been wrong an awful lot, and so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut on some of that. But I do think that is there hope? Is there any time when there isn't hope, unless you close it off, and that closing off is a certain kind of despair, and that despair Tolkien calls one hope, and that is the fear that not even God can save you from hell. And that's an interesting term that he uses in reference to Turin, and also to Denethor himself in the Unfinished Tales. So, and that's a theological term. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah. So, well, a question from Substack was, what do you make of Frodo's resistance to engage in violence during the scouring of the Shire?
Oh, I would say that's probably a couple of things. He's gone on this long journey. He's been injured. There's been so much taken out of him. He's seen so much violence, and it's like, let's not harm our own. Let's not harm those who are our kin, kind of thing. And so there's a certain kind of, I would say, pacifistic maturity that he has that Merry and Pippin don't have, because he has not engaged in any of the war, but he has simply seen how, I think, the desire, the bloodlust, can corrupt people. And so I think he's not keen on that. That'd be my initial take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that that was something that changed in the different editings of the Scouring of the Shire. Like when the Hobbits come back, the initial draft, Frodo does pick up a sword, and then he doesn't. And so it seems on the deliberate side, and thinking of Tolkien's own experience in World War One, and then having so many friends and family members both in that war and then kids and stuff in World War Two. That question of whether you pick it up again becomes personal again.
Well, don't you think that it's also for full circle of Gandalf telling Frodo that it was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand, and so Frodo has really absorbed that, and so he sees now that it's pity that should stay anyone's hand against Saruman.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the culmination of Frodo's maturity.
Mm-hmm. All right, Nick. You get to do the last question.
Okay, Craig. So I feel like, taking us home needs to be, some sort of banger here. No pressure or anything. But, I think these things are appropriate because it feels like these things are not just have global impacts, but feels like they even may have cosmic interactions and impacts too. And if you look at Tolkien's Legendarium, it is cosmic, right? It's ontological, it's metaphysical, all these things that are going on. Even the smallest act of a hobbit contributes to the larger shaping of Arda, and even potentially in the eschaton where they defeat Morgoth, or maybe Morgoth's redeemed. We don't know. The Fool's Hope, as you kind of referenced. But with the Tolkien and Trump thing, and whether or not trying to get away from like the political divide without dismissing the real bad political things that are happening in our world. Like, how do we develop fellowship in ways that can create counter narratives to the ones that trump Saruman, the Palantir, the deceptions that are being constructed for control. Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, and it's not one that I feel like I'm really equipped to say, but I would think that there is so much propaganda going on, and I just purchased Jacques Ellul's book, Propaganda, which is like 60 years old, and
it's excellent.
It's still relevant, it really is. And problem is, he writes like a sociologist. But leaving that aside,
well, he is one.
I know. It's not as bad as writing like a philosopher, though. So
hey,
so I would say that how do you combat that? I think it has to be on kind of a level of solidarity with because you see so much going on in terms of mainstream media, and people who think that mainstream media is liberal are just simply out to lunch. They've been bought out by all of Trump's friends, and they're not allowed to make certain editorials and those kinds of things. So it's almost as if the only place you can really get a clear analysis is on late night TV, with Seth Meyers and The Daily Show or Stephen Colbert, because they're actually telling the truth. So you think about those kinds of things, and how do you resist in ways that sustain your own integrity as well as speaking the truth? And I think I'm casting about for ideas from others. So anyone out there, send me emails. That's fine. Post on my Facebook page. Let me know what you're thinking, and because I think there is power in certain groups that have solidarity. I believe there's like 30% of people who never change their mind. They're simply not open to any kind of conversion. And I think one of the most important things is thinking about people who are open to conversion and listening. So thinking about, why do you think that? So I've been I've started asking people, well, why do you think that's the case that, such and such is the case? And, oftentimes you can distinguish between those who are foreclosed. Well, are you a libtard? Or, sometimes people will say, well, I read this such and such a place, but so much of social media is dominating our lives in ways that are unhealthy and stifle the intellect. And that's very sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of that. I mean, probably one of Gandalf's biggest zingers, where when Frodo's like, I wish it need not have happened in my time.
Mm-hmm.
That's like Gandalf's Sermon on the Mount,
But it's also a memento mori. It's this. I do these tours of the Cathedral Basilica in St. Louis, and one of the chapels is the All Souls Chapel, and it's really dark. And students come in there, and I say, "This is a reminder that you will die. You will die. I will die. Hopefully, I die before you do, because that would be appropriate." But this is for you to remember that. And that's really kind of what Gandalf is saying, in the subtext, is that all you have to do is to decide, what to do with the time that is given you, because your time is finite, and that's a sobering thought. And that's one of the things that our culture avoids as much as possible. Death is an inconvenience to us. And people don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, but it's just, it's tragic, and then it's gone, and then the people who are dealing with the aftermath have years of therapy, but
Yeah. Oh man, this has been so much fun. Craig, thank you so much. I love hanging out with both of you. How long till Rings of Power starts back, Nick?
There's so much misinformation online that I don't even know.
Yeah, I get confused on it. All I know is that I don't think things are going to turn out well for Numenor. This is I don't know if there's a way to bet on that.